Good afternoon. So today we're going to talk about a couple things. The first thing that we're going to discuss briefly is sort of how, so last lecture, you guys had the public good game, and basically nobody wanted to contribute to the public good. There was one group that contributed, I think, 1/4 of their tokens, and then everybody else basically contributed nothing. So today I just want to discuss for a few minutes what the research is on whether or not economists themselves are likely to play this game very differently than other people. And then we're going to move on to sort of the next topic in terms of environmental theory. And this will be one of the last sort of environmental economics topics in terms of the basic theory that we'll be talking about, which is basically willingness to pay and reveal preferences. But before we go there, so you guys basically played the public goods game like economists would forecast that you would play it, in the sense that you realized that even though socially it was optimal for everybody to contribute, from an individual's perspective or from an individual group's perspective, the optimal contribution was for you to contribute nothing and then hope that everybody else contributed something. But of course, everybody felt the same way, and so pretty much everybody contributed nothing except for Group 6, which felt very generous. But their generosity, unfortunately, was not returned by the rest of the class. So you might wonder, well, how sort of representative is this of how people might normally play the game? Like, are you guys sort of a special group, or does everybody play it this way? And I think the short answer is, for economists, you're not unusual, but or for people who are taking economics, you're not unusual. But if you just sort of randomly pull people off the street, or even just randomly pulled students, and you see Berkeley campus out, we might have gotten somewhat different results. So if we think about, or if we ask the question, are economists less likely to contribute in the public goods game? There's been research on this. So a paper, I guess, 30 years ago, found that basically first-year economics grad students are much more likely to free ride than others. So what they did is they compared econ grad students to, I think, like maybe some nursing students and some others. We'll see in a moment. But econ grad students basically had a 20% contribution rate. So their game wasn't set up exactly like ours, so you shouldn't sort of expect it to be identical in terms of the contribution rates. But 20% would probably be pretty low by most people's standards. And other subjects were not economics grad students, who were grad students in different fields. And the same game had a 49% contribution rate. So there was definitely a pretty large difference in the rates between the two groups. And then they sort of explored further, like, what were people thinking when they were doing these contributions, or when they were considering whether or not to do the contribution. And so they asked the question of what a fair investment was. So they passed out a survey to the participants afterwards and said, what would have been a fair investment. And among the non-econ grad students, 75% said more than half would have been fair, and 25% said all of it would be fair. So essentially nobody there, among the non-econ grad students, nobody thought that like zero was a fair contribution. Everybody pretty much thought that half or even more was a fair contribution. And in the econ grad students, so a third of them refused to answer or gave uncodable responses, basically because, according to the authors, the meaning of fairness in this context was somewhat alien for this group, so they sort of a lot of them didn't even understand, like, what do you mean by fair? And then the rest of them who actually did answer it said that little or nothing was fair. And then, okay, so that was, I guess that was compared against other grad students. Here's the one where they then, there's a different set of authors who compare nurses versus econ and business students. And this is just looking at sort of the contribution rates over time as you go through different rounds. So we had 4 rounds. Again, this game is set up differently, but they have many more rounds than we did. They have like 25 rounds or something like that. And so for the nurses, you can see that the contribution rate starts out higher and gets lower, but it kind of comes to this like steady state of around 25% or so. Whereas for the economics and business students, it quickly degrades down to 0 or close to 0. And then, so the final piece of research is looking at whether or not this is like sort of due to differences in the types of students in terms of their like personalities coming in, or whether it's actually due to the economics curriculum itself, right? So you can imagine sort of 2 stories. One story is that economists, that all the students, both the non-econ students and the econ students, sort of come in thinking similar things, and the economists basically teach them that like what you should do in these types of situations is always be selfish and don't try to like be altruistic and help out the classroom as a whole. And so then they start doing that. And so that's sort of a scenario in which we'd say that the economics curriculum itself is having a causal effect on the contribution rates. The other scenario, though, is that maybe sort of people who are less altruistic and more likely to not contribute are also the types of people who are likely to select into economics as a major. And so they take economics, and then other people take different subjects and are more altruistic even before the classes. And so in that case, we sort of see the same result, that the economists are less generous than the non-economists, but it's not a causal effect of the economics curriculum itself, right? Instead, it's basically just reflecting that the types of people who go into economics are just different than the types of people who don't go into economics. So what Robert Frank does is he basically looks at he's looking, I think, at students coming into Cornell, and they can take one of 2 courses. So there's 2 instructors who are offering microeconomics courses. There's the microeconomics A and the microeconomics B. And it turns out that one of the instructors sort of teaches what we call mainstream economics, which is sort of more likely to emphasize that you should be maximizing your own utility. And then the other instructor was apparently a specialist in Maoist China. I don't like. That's kind of rare to find in an economics department these days, but this maybe research was a while ago. Anyway, so he was like a little bit less mainstream, although he did still use like a normal text and so forth. And so you could think of maybe the people who go into one instructor versus the other as being more or less randomly assigned. In particular, since they were freshmen coming in, they probably didn't really know like the reputations of the different instructors and so forth, and they're probably just taking whatever fit with their schedule or whatever the school assigned, whichever school assigned them to, whichever course the school assigned them to. And so you would think that maybe ex ante they would be pretty similar in terms of their generosity or their honesty. And sure enough, they were. So they took a survey at the beginning before the classes began. And what they found is that the students who were in the A track versus the B track basically answer these questions similarly. So the survey involved questions like sort of these hypothetical scenarios. So like you're a business owner and there's some billing error in your favor. Do you end up like telling the company that made the billing error that they made an error? And another one is like you find so there's sort of two sides of either question. So one is a stranger finds your lost the $100 you lost. Do you think that the stranger is going to return it to you? And then the other is that you find $100 that a stranger lost. Are you going to return it to the stranger? So in the second, like in this scenario, basically they're like asking you how honest are you, and then in this scenario they're basically asking you how honest do you think other people are. But the two tend to be correlated in the sense that like people who themselves are less honest probably think of the world as being a more dishonest place and vice versa. Anyway, so in terms of all of these questions, at the baseline before the class began, it turns out that all the students were answering pretty similarly. They also had this group of astronomy students as well, and I think even they were answering similarly, although you would think that perhaps the astronomy students might be somewhat different than the econ students. And then they looked at essentially how much less honest people became over the course of the semester. So what's charted here is actually the change in honesty from when you enter the class to like the end of the semester or the end of the year. And so a higher bar here basically means you're becoming more dishonest as the semester goes on. And you can see that the students who were in this microeconomics A course that had the mainstream curriculum sort of became the most, or they had the largest increase in dishonesty over the course of the semester relative to the other students. So it does seem like economics sort of teaches people to behave in the utility maximizing selfish way that the models themselves predict people would behave. So there's a little bit of sort of circular thing going on there. Karen?
Why does the
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I think I think part of it is that they're becoming less naive over time or something. I mean, so they're entering college as kind of these idealistic, dewy-eyed people, and then they become a little bit jaded as the semester goes on. So you could almost think of like the astronomy group as being like a control group that just kind of is picking up the general increase in people's perception of the dishonesty of the world and maybe their own dishonesty as time goes on or as they get older here. But yeah, so something's changing regardless. Okay, so I guess the moral is don't trust economists. Okay, so then the second thing that I want to talk about today is what we call revealed preferences and willingness to pay. And so the goal here, or the focus here, is that we want to think about how you potentially value a good that's not actually traded openly on the market. So if you think about sort of what the big problems in environmental economics are, one of the main problems is that we need to try to assign a dollar value to environmental goods. The reason that usually we're interested in doing this is because we're trying to do some sort of policy analysis. So something comparing like the costs and benefits of a particular regulation or a particular policy initiative. And if the benefits are environmental benefits, then you ultimately need to put some sort of dollar value on them. So in order to, for example, quantify externalities, we're going to need to measure the value of the environmental good that's being affected by a negative externality. Typically, this isn't a big problem in terms of like we're trying to measure the value that consumers assign to a good, because we can just look at market prices to determine the value of at least the marginal good that's sold. So the idea here is simply that when you observe goods being traded in the market, if the marginal consumer didn't value the good at the market price, then he or she would not have bought that good. So presumably they value it at least that much price. So the reason I say marginal consumer is that, again, usually we have downward sloping demand curves. So you have like demand, let's just say the supply is set at some price P, the supply curve is at some price P. And so the last consumer in the market who buys it at price P, we know that in theory they are indifferent between whether or not they bought it, and they value it. Their value that they assigned to that good is exactly the price that they paid. Now, to be fair, there are other consumers sort of further to the left here that actually value the good at more than they paid for it, so they're getting some sort of positive consumer surplus from it. So we can't say that the total value of the good to all consumers is equal to the number of units paid times the price. It's actually going to exceed that because there's some people who are getting positive valuation or positive net benefits from it, which is say that they're getting consumer surplus because they're valuing it or they're paying less than they value it at. So we can't say that we can measure the total market value, the total value to consumers of a good even when we observe the market price. But we can at least get a pretty good estimate because we know everybody values it at least P or more. We know the marginal person, the last person who sort of bought it, if we could sort of stack people in terms of their willingness to pay from left to right. Then we know the last person who bought it valued it exactly P dollars, and we can get an overall estimate at least of sort of getting a ballpark of what the total valuation might be. But when we start talking about public goods that aren't traded in markets, we can't observe prices because of course they're not traded in any market. So it's not like somebody's going and paying for a public good and then revealing exactly how much they're willing to pay for that good. So how do we actually assign a value to them? Turns out there are two relatively common methods for measuring the consumer valuation of non-market goods. And the goal for either of these methods is to measure one of two things. So one thing would be a consumer's willingness to pay. So the idea here is trying to measure how much you would be willing to pay to obtain an environmental good that you do not currently have. But then the other possibility would be measuring a consumer's willingness to accept. So that's sort of the reverse question. It's asking how much would you need to be paid in order to give up an environmental good. So in many cases, these two values are going to be very close to each other, if not identical, but they don't always have to be. And there's sort of two reasons for that. So the neoclassical economics reason is that there are potentially wealth effects. And that means that the willingness to pay, somebody's willingness to pay might be different than their willingness to accept. So okay, so the intuition there is, I think it's pretty clear empirically that as wealth goes up, people's valuation of environmental goods go up. So if you think about, say, comparing the U.S. to China, right? Like the U.S. has something like 5 times the purchasing power parity adjusted GDP per capita, so we think it was being like 5 times per capita richer than China. And we also place a higher valuation on environmental goods. So I don't know how many of you have been to China. I was there like I guess about 5 months ago or something in Beijing, and I'll just say it's incredibly dirty and polluted. And part of that is like, well, their economy is growing really quickly, and so in order to get economic growth, they have to produce all these goods and all this like energy, and they don't produce it that cleanly, using like a lot of coal and so forth. So it's perhaps not surprising, but basically what it comes down to is that people in the U.S. are wealthy enough so they're sort of willing to sacrifice more in terms of goods and services to gain environmental, cleaner air and so forth, cleaner water than Chinese are. And that's presumably not because the U.S., like people in the U.S. are sort of inherently assigning a higher value to environmental goods and service than people in China are. I think it's much more likely that essentially, people in the U.S. have enough money so that even if they pay some money to reduce air pollution, they still feel like they're pretty wealthy. Whereas in China, if you're at 1/5 the U.S. income per capita, having more income might be more valuable at that point to you than having somewhat cleaner air. Although, even in China, I think there is sort of a lot of building pressure to try to clean up some of the worst environmental problems. So there's sort of this stylized fact that essentially as countries grow, even though their economic output is increasing, they often end up getting cleaner, especially once you get past a particular point. So like China is probably dirtier now than it was 30 years ago, but I would expect that 30 years from now, they'll probably actually be cleaner than they are right now, even though their economic output will be much higher because they'll probably be willing to sort of channel more resources into environmental goods rather than just purely like market traded goods. Anyway, so the point is simply that as people get wealthier, their willingness to pay for an environmental good may increase. And when you talk about sort of comparing willingness to pay versus willingness to accept, you're talking about the willingness to pay for the same good versus the willingness to accept for the same good. Even though you're talking about the same good, the wealth implications are different in those two scenarios. So, if you're measuring somebody's willingness to pay for the good, you're basically saying they don't have that good right now, and they need to pay extra to obtain it. If you're asking about their willingness to accept, then you're saying that they already have that good, and they're being asked how much they would have to accept in order to give it up. And so basically, if you sort of compare the two people in identical situations, except in one case they already own the good and they're being paid to give it up, in the other case they don't own it and they have to pay to get it, the person in the second case is wealthier than the person in the first case, right? Because they already own that property right, which potentially is valuable if these WGP or WTA amounts are large. And in the first case, they don't own the property right, so they're going to have to shell out extra money to pay it. So these can be different because of wealth effects, but unless it's a really expensive good, so unless the property right here we're talking about is very valuable, it probably shouldn't make a very large difference. The second reason why these two numbers might diverge, though, is something that I think came up last time, like in the last lecture when we were doing the public goods game, which is that there is sort of like this loss aversion, right? So in one case, you're taking you're looking at a scenario where somebody doesn't have something, and then you're saying how much would you be willing to pay in order to get it. So they're sort of losing money but gaining this good that they're sort of not accustomed to having right now. In the other case, you're asking, you're saying, okay, you already own this good, be it clean air or whatever, and then you're asking people to get, or you're offering people extra money to take it away from them. And so to the extent that there is loss aversion, like to the extent that people are unhappy about sort of giving up things that they already have and more unhappy about that they would be happy to receive them, then that's going to make you sort of the willingness to pay amount is going to tend to be lower because it's like they're going to have to lose money in order to get that sort of unknown good. So they might not want to lose that much money. And the willingness to accept amount might be kind of higher because they're going to sort of be thinking about losing the good, which they may be accustomed to having and they may not want to lose now. And then they're gaining some money. But as we know, like sort of the utility from gaining the money may not be as big as the disutility from losing the same amount of money. Okay, so we're going to measure one of these two. Often they're pretty similar, but they may diverge for the two reasons I just discussed. So in order to measure these amounts, either the willingness to pay or the willingness to accept, there are two common methods. One is what we call revealed preferences. So this basically involves observing what people do, like the actual choices they make, and then inferring valuation from those choices. And then the second method is what's called stated preferences. Sometimes it's also referred to as contingent valuation. So if you ever hear, I don't know if I'll use that term sort of that much, but if I say that or if you read it elsewhere, contingent valuation, what they're referring to there is stated preferences. So I'm going to talk about both these things, but I'm going to begin with the revealed preferences method. So the idea behind revealed preferences is basically that you're trying to, so what you're doing here is you're really sort of trying to get back to a world in which the good is actually traded on market. And ideally what you find here is you try to like identify a situation in which the non-market good that you're interested in is associated with some sort of market transaction. So if the non-market good that you want to value is actually associated with a market transaction, then you might be able to infer the value of the non-market good by observing sort of what people are willing to pay in those transactions. That's why we call it the revealed preferences method, because sort of in these transactions, people are revealing their preferences for the good. And a very simple method, or a very simple example, is what we call the travel cost method. So you can think about trying to assign a valuation to the Mendocino coastline. So if you've been up to Mendocino, it's very pretty there. They also grow a lot of pot there, but that's kind of neither here nor there. That is traded on a market, though not one that is generally observed. The economists have gone and like collected data on drug transactions and so forth to study the drug market too. But at any rate, let's just focus on the recreational, the non-substance related recreational benefits of going to view the Mendocino coastline. So it's not, once you're there, there's no, it's not like they're going to charge you a fee for sort of viewing the scenery, right? It's basically free once you're there. But most people aren't there. It's pretty rural. It's not close to any major cities. And so most people have to travel to get there. And so then you can start thinking about, well, how much does it cost for somebody to travel there? If we observe that they do travel there and they're paying these costs, then presumably that means that they value the benefit of the scenery and whatever sort of other non-market goods might be attached to being there. They value that at more than the costs of traveling there. So in particular, like we're coming from the Bay Area, I think it costs you probably about $75 in monetary costs, thinking about sort of gas costs and so forth, and about 6 hours of time to travel to Mendocino. So of course then you have to, so the $75 in gas costs are in dollar terms, then you have to assign some sort of like monetary value to time, and that's not always easy to do. If you observe somebody's wages, then you might assign sort of their dollars per hour that they make, but whether or not that's the amount that they value the marginal hour of leisure at is sort of not clear, but it'll at least probably be somewhere in the ballpark. So if we're thinking of having me travel there, so my wages, I guess, work out to $50 an hour if you took my salary and divided it by the number of hours in a work year. And so if you then sort of calculate my use value of Mendocino coastline, you would think that it equals or exceeds $375 because there's $75 in the monetary cost and then $300 in terms of time valuation. And the argument is that if I didn't value it at least that much, then presumably I wouldn't have traveled there. So that's one way in which for the specific good, you might be able to tease out the valuation. But these travel cost methods are generally only useful for specific types of recreational goods where people are actually traveling a good distance in order to access them. A more common example is what's known as hedonic pricing. So the term hedonic pricing, or the method of hedonic pricing, is often used both in the context of housing choices and in the context of jobs. And the intuition here is basically as follows. So a good, in this case, a house or a job, usually has multiple characteristics about it that people value or want to avoid. And so consumers are going to assign a value to each of these characteristics. So if we think about like housing choices, sorry.
Before the last minute, is it sort of fair to judge the people who are willing able to travel to that area? Because let's say Mendocino might be good in the environmental terms for other people, but they're not willing to travel, they're not able to travel.
Right. So that's a good question. And so that's like what economists or environmental economists will refer to as something like existence value. So like an example would be, say, the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, right? So almost nobody is ever going to travel there. And yet if you ask people, well, should we like drill in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge? A lot of people say no, or they'll say like, no, yes, but there have to be like strong restrictions on where you can drill and safety measures and so forth, right? And so in that case, they're clearly assigning some value to it, but it's not because they want to preserve it for them so they themselves can go and visit it later. So it is absolutely the case that people could be assigning value even if they don't plan to ever travel there themselves or have no intention to do so. And in that case, then it's much harder to sort of elicit those people's valuations. So like in